Everyone knows about the dude, the middle-aged hippie slacker with a fondness for white Russians, pot, and rugs. There's about a dozen videos on the Big Lebowski and where these characters come from. They were mainly inspired by friends of Joel and Ethan Coen, notably producer Jeff Dowd for the dude, and then actor-writer Louis Abernathy and the John Milius for Walter. But what about the story of the fake kidnapping with the old, rich, handicapped man, the young, promiscuous trophy wife with an interesting past, and the modern art feminist daughter with a mid-Atlantic accent, along with money that's owed to another rich individual whose wealth and affiliations are sketchy, and the story where the dude is seemingly thrown into a mystery with
a lot of ins, a lot of outs.
The answer is Marlowe, Philip Marlowe. The Big Lebowski is a loose remake of The Big Sleep and other novels by Raymond Chandler. These books are classic hardboiled detective novels ranging from 1939 to 1958. The novels in sequential order are The Big Sleep, Farewell My Lovely, The High Window, Lady in the Lake, The Little Sister, The Long Goodbye, and Playback. They are mystery novels, with a private detective, Philip Marlowe, who is thrown into an increasingly chaotic mystery. He's an abrasive figure, who's often quite sharp-tongued, has a strong code, and he's always got a comeback.
I'm not crazy about you, as I didn't ask to see you. I don't mind if you don't like my manners. I don't like them myself. They're pretty bad. I grieve over them long winter evenings, and I don't mind you ritzing me or drinking your lunch out of a bottle. But don't waste your time trying to cross-examine me.
Like the dude.
Yeah, well, that's just like, your opinion, man.
Post-World War I was the real start of the hard-boiled genre, with many veterans seeing the horrors of war and developing a sense of cynicism and disillusionment with society. The generation was known as the Lost Generation, had a big impact on the literary and real world. Such authors as Hemingway and F. Scott Fitzgerald were part of this generation, writing in Parisian cafes, getting their stories published in prestigious magazines like the Saturday Evening Post. But on the other side of the Atlantic, there was another generation of American writers, at home writing for less prestigious magazines, like The Black Mask. This is where Chandler got his start, publishing short stories for this magazine. His predecessor, Dashiell Hammett, also got his start at this magazine, and his characters, such as Sam Spade, the Maltese Falcon, and the Continental Op of Red Harvest, and the Dane Curse, were a base for Chandler to create Marlowe. These hard-boiled writers portrayed these disillusioned and cynical characters, who were often war veterans, as they themselves were. The dude is similar, as he was someone who, while not fighting in Vietnam, was very affected and went through a change like many of those Lost Generation types did. He's just not so cynical, nor macho. This is also why the movie takes place during Desert Storm, because most Marlowe novels take place during World War II. They're both older men sitting on the sidelines through a major conflict. Like the dude, Marlowe likes to drink. Mostly bourbon and scotch, not white Russians. And he has a penchant for developing relationships with females entangled in the mystery. He also likes to get drugged and knocked out as well, and frequently smokes cigarettes. Of course, Marlowe is also similar to Walter in many ways, as they are both veterans and are even in similar businesses, as Walter owns a security practice, like Marlowe with his own detective practice. They are both strongly principled as well, with Marlowe never taking any money that he's felt he hasn't rightfully earned, and Walter's strict adherence to Judaism, despite getting a divorce.
3,000 years of beautiful tradition from Moses to Sandy Koufax. You're goddamn right I'm living in the past!
And him pulling a gun on Smokey when he went over the line. Of course, Marlowe isn't anywhere near as short-tempered as Walter, known to keep his cool in very dangerous and tense situations. If you take the dude and Walter and turn them into one person, you kind of get Marlowe. They're both extremes of his personality, the laid-back, sassy attitude of the dude, and the aggressive, uptight attitude of Walter, create someone who's kind of both, and that's Marlowe. Now, of course, many of the characters are also based on what you see in a Marlowe novel. The old Lebowski in a wheelchair is mostly based on General Sternwood, an old man in a wheelchair who has to live in a hot greenhouse to live. Like Lebowski, they're both handicapped. Both veterans and old, but Sternwood's a lot more of a wise, nicer older man, and not a grumpy old coot who postures about his wealth and marries an adult film actress. Old Lebowski has more of the persona of Elizabeth Bright Murdoch from High Window, who's a bitter old coot who's quite nefarious, like the old Lebowski. Bunny is similar to Carmen Sternwood, who is the daughter of General Sternwood and had very similar adult connections. Maud is quite similar to Vivian Regan. They're both daughters of old, rich, handicapped men, and both have interesting affiliations. Maud with the weird modern art world, and Vivian more with big-time criminals, like Eddie Mars, who runs a big casino, and her former marriage to bootlegger Rusty Regan. Julianne Moore's performance is also quite similar to Lauren Bacall's performance of Vivian Sternwood in Howard Hawks' adaptation of The Big Sleep. They have the same temperament, like they are hiding something, and are both rather bold in talking to Marlowe and the dude, and both function as love interests for both the dude and Marlowe. Now, the more minor characters, like Jackie Treehorn, are based on characters like Eddie Mars from Big Sleep and others from pretty much every Marlowe novel, where there's a big criminal boss tied to the story, someone who usually runs an illegal business like gambling. Except Treehorn himself doesn't run a legal business, except for maybe loan sharking. The Malibu Sheriff is based on a cop in The Long Goodbye, specifically with the throwing a coffee cup at the dude. But in the book, Marlowe dodges it. The dude... Ow! Well, you know. The sheriff also says a line,
Mr. Treehorn draws a lot of water in this town.
Which is from Playback, Chandler's last and worst novel. The private detective who follows the dude around is based on a character in The Big Sleep, who follows Marlowe for a while, and also on a private detective who follows Marlowe in High Window, who even says the line, pull our resources together. The scene is there pretty much to hint to us that this is a private detective story in another skin, as the private detective thinks the dude is a private detective. Now the Sam Elliott character is there as a substitute for Marlowe's narration, and as a throwback to the past, to the Old West, as even in the beginning of The Big Sleep, the Sternwood Mansion throws back to the time with a painting from the Mexican-American War. The past of the Old West in California would have been in living memory during the time of Chandler. Now, it isn't just the characters that are pulled from a Marlowe novel, it's the plot and structure. Here's how most of them go down. Number 1. Marlowe is hired for a simple job, like track down a blackmailer in The Big Sleep, or find a missing spouse like Lady in the Lake, or is literally just pulled into the mystery by a thug, like in Farewell My Lovely. 2. He follows a lead and discovers a dead body. Cops get involved, breathe down his neck, and sometimes throw him in jail. 3. He gets close to a femme fatale type to get more info, and just because of attraction as well, like with Vivian Regan in The Big Sleep, and they usually almost sleep together, but don't. Or only at the end of the novel. 4. Marlowe tries to meet a big criminal boss, usually somehow tied in with the case, but isn't usually directly guilty of the crimes. 5. Marlowe overplays his hand in an interaction and ends up getting clonked on the head, drugged, or both. And 6. Marlowe goes through another trial, like confronting a big boss, or even getting into a gunfight, and survives. 7. He figures out what happens and confronts the mastermind behind it, and then the mastermind runs away, kills themselves, is killed later on, or nothing happens. Like in High Window in The Big Sleep, where the perpetrator is just kind of left alone. Does this sound familiar? Minus all the dead bodies, except for Donnie Rip. The storyline is quite familiar. The structure of these novels have great comedic potential, as they are almost always an elaborate case with a wisecracking detective, where every criminal seems to be a caricature. The stories also always end with a twist, like most detective fiction, but it's usually quite weird and elaborate. I won't spoil any of the novels, but they pretty much all have these endings, where the reasoning is there, but it's still a little confusing. Like in The Big Lebowski, where you don't get an outright confession about the crime, but you know it was pretty much a big nothing burger, which encapsulates the ending of many Marlowe novels. A lot of them just ending, nothing's really being done. Playback has the most similar ending to this, in my opinion, where it's nothing really elaborate, nothing really changes. And with a lot of other Marlowe novels, the mystery is wrapped up but not fully, or a lot of questions are left unanswered. Of the 7 novels, all but one was adapted into a movie. Quite ironically, the one that wasn't adapted, Playback, was originally written as a screenplay. Some of these movies include The Big Sleep with Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall, directed by Howard Hawks, Marlowe 1969, The Long Goodbye, starring Elliot Gould, directed by Robert Altman, and other less notable adaptations like Murder My Sweet, which adapts Farewell My Lovely, and Farewell My Lovely in the 70s, starring a little too old for the role Robert Mitchum. In my opinion, none of these really come that close to emulating the Chandler atmosphere. The Long Goodbye does build a good atmosphere and has some great performances like Sterling Hayden as Roger Wade, but it completely butchers the book. If you read it, you know what I mean. The Big Lebowski captures that atmosphere and feeling of a Marlowe novel better than the Marlowe adaptations do. It's one that's warm, fun, and adventurous, with an element of danger, with characters popping up and out of the blue and everywhere, and traveling throughout all of LA. The atmosphere, more than anything else, is what the movie personifies from the books. So if you're looking for any books to read, I'd recommend Raymond Chandler. Start with The Big Sleep and then read from there in sequential order.